Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Danny.
Thank you, Jennifer. Morning, everybody. What a beautiful group of people we have today. Sitting here in the sanctuary, and if you're joining us out in Zoom world, welcome to you as well. And of course, for all the people out in YouTube world in the metaverse, otherwise known as Facebook later, however you show up, we're glad you show up. Glad you're here. All right, let's get going. Most of us here today have heard about spiritual gifts, right? A lot of us have, they're in the Bible. There are different passages that list things like hospitality and prayer and preaching and teaching and so forth as reminders that each of us have gifts that we can use to benefit not only our communities, benefit our lives, but benefit the world around us. These gifts in the Bible, however, are not exhaustive, at least not in my mind. Now, there are other talents which I think are serious contenders for the title of spiritual gift, and juggling is just one of those. Yes, juggling. Think about this. How many times do they even have circuses anymore? Have you been to the circus, or have you watched TV and you see the people juggling while walking on a high wire? Right, and they're going along and they're not even looking where their next step is. And then you hear the commentator, would you look at that? 100 feet above the floor and without a net. What skill, what talent, what courage. Without a net, huh? I don't know about y'all folks, but sometimes I think there is a really fine line between courage and crazy. Now, most of us sitting here today are probably juggle in the way of this commercial I saw on Sci-Fi a few years ago. And you may have seen it. If you watch the Sci-Fi channel, there was this guy, ordinary guy, just juggling a few items and then just very casually and without spilling a drop of blood, just pops off his head and starts juggling his head with all the kind of gross sounding, but it's kind of comical to look at. And the first time I saw this commercial, it was after a very, very long and stressful and exhausting day. And I just plopped down on the couch and I looked at that commercial and said, yep, that about sums it up. Yep. More of us than we realize have this gift of juggling too. If you think about it, a lot of us juggle job responsibilities. We juggle doctor's appointments, and we juggle things like hobbies, and some of us add to that church work and volunteer work and hobbies and children and grandchildren and all of those things. Now I want you to get that visual and add to it juggling 613 commandments. Just think of it as juggling for Jesus. Commandments. Now, last week I talked a lot about tradition. This week we're going to kind of move into commandments and rules and regulations. Now, most of us remember the original 10 commandments from the book of Exodus. Very basic, common sense ground rules for communal living back during that time. And if you update them for today, and where we live today in our culture today, they still make a lot of sense, right? Whatever the God of your understanding is, focus on that. Love and respect that. Take a day off every now and then. Respect God, respect one another, respect life. Don't go around killing each other. Respect your relationship and the relationships around you. What was that old country song? Don't give me no line and keep your hands to yourself. Appreciate the things you have in your life and don't go around stealing other people's stuff. Don't covet that stuff. Don't lie. What was it, the first agreement we did last month? Speak your words, use the power of your word in the direction of love and truth. All common sense stuff, we get that, the basic 10. Oh, but no. Because being the good human beings are, if 10 commandments are good, 613 have got to be better, right? So over time, people began to ask questions about these commandments and what it means to live them. Like the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. No work on the Sabbath. Okay, well, what do you mean by work? What does that look like? And when is the Sabbath? And don't kill each other. Well, what if they try to kill me first? Or adultery, right? Your respect the relationships you have and the relationships of others. You might be interested to learn it was a very different thing then than it is now. The rules applied differently to men than it did for women. So over time, people kept asking questions, and then they just developed 613 moral and ceremonial laws to help explain how to live out the 10. And then they further divided these into 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. And then from there, some Jewish sages even taught that the number 248 pertains to the number of body parts we have, and 365, one for every day of the year. Interesting. Very detail-oriented. So by now, I'll bet at least some of you out there are thinking, well, Danny, last week you were saying that was then and this is now, and times changed, so I think that applies here. These were probably very culturally specific, and besides, we're not Jewish. So these really don't pertain to us too much. Well, those are some good points. I'm sure some of those 613 were very culturally specific to the time. And you make good points there. But let's face it, some of us have a hard enough time keeping the original 10, right? But I want everyone here to be very clear. All 613 and the Big 10, all of that, it's all in the Old Testament, throughout the Old Testament. There's not a list of 613. They're all kind of sprinkled around. So it's all there. And there are a lot of Christian traditions which embrace the whole Bible. Does it apply? Does it not? Just something for you to think about in your spare time. Something else for you to juggle. Besides, Christianity isn't all that dogmatic now, is it? Well, no and yes. Maybe Christians aren't quite as detail-oriented as our Jewish siblings when it comes to the rules. But we do have them, don't we? Some Christian traditions have rules, a lot of rules about women. What women can and cannot wear, what positions they can and cannot hold in church. In some, how long their dresses should be, and don't even think about pants. How long your dresses should be, how long your hair should be, what your place is in the marriage relationship. I could go on. And to be fair, the guys have some rules too, but they just don't seem to be quite as strict. Then again, the guys wrote the rules, so there is that. And you laugh at it, some of this is funny, but the thing is, people will point to certain scriptures in the Bible and says, well, it says so right here. So that's why it is the way it is. Does anyone remember that scripture about slavery? Slaves, obey your masters. Did you know that there were Christian churches for years that taught that? They used that in a way to support racism and racist policy. Some, unfortunately, still do. In some Christian traditions, there are rules about what songs you can sing during what part of the year, what translation of the Bible you may or may not use, and when you may use it, the proper words for baptisms and burials and weddings. Some churches define what you can and cannot teach in your education program. There are rules about what scriptures you read during the services at different times of the year. And if the church is more formal in its expression, and I've been a part of a few of those, and a minister at a few of those MCCs, we had color coding, right? There are different seasons of the church year. So sometimes of the year you had purple on the table, or you had green, or you had white, or so forth and so on. And depending on the group, if you got the color wrong, you were in trouble. Trust me, I heard that. Reverend Danny, isn't the color supposed to be red today? Pentecost? Well, Pentecost in some traditions is one Sunday out of the year, and for other churches, it is a whole season. So it can be a little bit confusing. When I guest speak at MCCs today, sometimes I will have people ask, well, what lectionary reading are you using? And then I have to remind them, I'm with Unity now, and we don't quite do that. But I said, you just tell me and I'll go there. It's okay. Now, a lot of these rules that I just mentioned, the latter ones especially, don't really impact your afterlife experience. There are, however, some rules about what you say about Jesus and God and the Bible, or what you do or do not believe about those issues that, according to these traditions, will determine your afterlife experience. Now, I want you to be clear here with me that I'm not sharing all this information as a criticism of those traditions, okay? I'm not. Remember what we say in Unity? We respect the right of every person to choose his or her own spiritual path. So if you're watching out in Zoom world, or if you're sitting here and any of the things I just mentioned are part of your tradition or things you support, that is great. Blessings to you, and I mean that. I want only the best and highest for your spiritual journey. And to be honest, folks, we got our own stuff in Unity and New Thought too. Nope, we don't promise you heaven if you behave or if you follow our teachings or do everything the way Charles and Myrtle said. We don't do that. And we don't threaten you with hell if you don't. We don't do that. But can you imagine in an organization where 75% of your members are women, telling the women you can't be a minister or you can't be a leader in the church? Can you imagine in a tradition like Unity trying to enforce a dress code of any type? Yeah, good luck with that one. Yeah. So we don't do stuff like that, but we do have our moments. There are those who say, if you are sick, if you're experiencing illness, you're thinking about illness. Because remember, third principle, we create our reality through the power of our thoughts. So every single thought you have, if something bad happens to you, well, that's your fault. That's on you. Or if for some reason or another you lose your job, or there's an economic downturn in your life, no, it's not because it's the economy or this or that. It's because you are not practicing prosperity consciousness properly. So therefore, it's all on you. I even had a person tell me one time they were in a New Thought church, just started attending, was loving what they were hearing. They went into a time of meditation, and he sat there with his hands in his lap, and he was really into it. And someone leaned over and tapped him and said, "You're doing that wrong." I said, "What?" "Your hands are supposed to be open so you can receive. You're not going to receive. You're doing it wrong." And I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Thank goodness he didn't leave. Folks, there is a word for when we do stuff like that. It is called metaphysical malpractice. And if unity ever does come up with a commandment, I am going to suggest, thou shalt not participate in metaphysical malpractice. Not only is it not helpful, it can be incredibly painful and hurtful. Let's not do that. Unless you think I'm knocking unity and New Thought teachings and all that, I'm not. Because, like other religious traditions, our commandments, if you will, or our teachings and our things like that, are what help give us a sense of spiritual and communal identity. It's that thing that enables us to live out our principles. It's that thing that those things that enable us to say, we can respect every other religious path and tradition while standing and respecting and living in our own. So yes, I think our principles and our teachings are great. At the same time, when the letter of the law, when the letter of those teachings and principles become more important than the spirit upon which they are built, we've missed the point. But it's still a lot, isn't it? How many of y'all have read Charles and Myrtle? Or some of the other New Thought leaders, Ernest Holmes, on that? Oh my gosh, that's a lot. And they were writing from their perspective and from their period of time, right? So they were wordy. And some of that stuff is really deep, and it is a lot to sort through. How do you sort through all that stuff? Well, thank goodness we have our master teacher, Jesus, because he cut through all that, and he gave us the bottom line. And I think it applies just as much now as it did then. It's called the Great Commandment. A lawyer who was trying to trip up Jesus one time asked him a question. He says, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Can you imagine? Because there were 613 by then. Yeah, Jesus, 613. Pick one. It's like sitting in a big unity congregation and saying, which teaching of Charles Fillmore is the greatest? Go ahead. Pick one. Yeah, let's start a fight. Why not? Well, Jesus cut through it all. He quoted from what is known as the Shema from the book of Deuteronomy. He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these hang all the law and the prophets. And it's important to note here too that Greek word for like that was used there, it means that the second commandment is actually of equal importance, and it is inseparable from the first. So what that means for us is to love God is to love your neighbor and to love yourself. So there's no separating this into a holy to-do list. Like, okay, loving God. Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at that. I know what my view of God is, and I love that and respect that. And loving myself, hey, I'm okay. I'm all right. Pretty good opinion of myself. But my neighbor, oh, Danny, you have no clue. You have no clue how crazy my neighbors are. And I'm not even talking about the people living next door to me. I'm talking about people in my life are just crazy. That's true. I don't know. And I don't need to know. But at the same time, it's pretty clear here, at least to me, we're all part of the oneness. We express differently, yes. So we may see some people's expressions and think that is crazy. And they may look at us and see our expressions and think we're a little crazy too. But it doesn't matter, folks, because we're all part of the same oneness. We are an eachness, each one of us. We are an eachness in the allness that is God. So what I believe Jesus is saying here is that this loving God, neighbor, and self It's not something that can be broken down into 613 ceremonial and moral laws. It is a way of life. And since it is a way of life, it is a continuous process. We don't do it once and say, I've got this. We learn every day. And some days we're going to do this better than others. And that's okay. And about that love thing, I'm not talking about a sentimental kind of love here. Yes, feelings are involved here, but it's not solely based on feelings. Living out the great commandment, loving God, neighbor, and self, requires a love that is unmanipulated, unconditional, and unlimited. This is a love of commitment and action. Fifth principle, living out the truths that we know. It is a love that embraces an appropriate love of the self. Why? Because you can't give what you don't have yourself. This is a love that says yes, and this is a love that knows when to say no. Because, folks, sometimes the greatest way we can show love is to say no to someone or something. This is a love that reflects the very nature of God expressing through us and as us. Living this kind of love in our spiritual communities emphasizes people and not programs, relationships and not religion, Christ consciousness and not creeds, and the power of now, not a romanticized past, nor a pie in the sky future. Now, does that mean all that other stuff is wrong? No, not at all. Folks, programs and religion and ritual and a very cherished past and a hope for the future are great. They all have their places. The challenge becomes is when we start focusing on that stuff and all the rules and all that stuff, when we focus on that stuff and we forget to live out the great commandment, that's when we start dropping balls. That's when it all starts to fall apart. There's good news here. The good news is we don't have to worry about juggling for Jesus. For Jesus said that basically everything boils down to the love of God, neighbor, and self. And yes, Jesus did model some very specific ways for us to live out that kind of love. That's great. Jesus never said that the way he did it was the only way to do it. Folks, the law of spiritual love is a powerful force. And when it is embraced and put into action in our lives and in our communities, our relationships and entire communities are transformed. In every time, in every place, in every situation, the practice of love of God, neighbor, and self is going to have a positive impact on the world. You may think, my little part isn't going to count. Yes, it does. Everything counts. And you know what? When we practice this love of God, neighbor, and self, sometimes the biggest impact and the biggest change occurs in us. So, if you haven't been here for a while, the rule is we say it loud and we say it proud. Repeat after me. Love of God. Love of neighbor. Love of self. One more time, a little bit louder. Love of God. There you go. Love of neighbor. Love of self. Let's not drop the ball, okay? And so it is.
I was going to do one of my songs to lead us into meditation called I Am Empowered. But there's a hymn in the hymnal. It goes like this. Love, 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 love. The gospel in one word is love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love, love, love. That's all it is. Can you sing that with me? Love, 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 love. The gospel in one word is love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love, love, love. One more time. Love, 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 love. The gospel in one word is love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love, love,
So as we go into our time of meditation this morning, I invite you to, as you're comfortable, to place your feet on the ground, to close your eyes or to hold a soft gaze. Let's take a moment, take a deep breath in and release. Take another deep breath in and release. One more time, deep breath in and release. Encourage you as you're able to kind of calm the mind a bit. Sometimes there is so much that we are juggling, not only physically, but mentally. The Buddhists call it monkey mind. Let's see if we can just calm that just a bit. Now is the only time we have. And right here is the only place we need to be in this moment. I want you to take a moment and think about your holy to-do list. How much of that can you release? Is anything on that list perhaps preventing you from living out the great commandment, love of God and neighbor and self? Yes, maybe we're following the rules and crossing the T's and dotting the I's, but somehow it's not resonating with spirit within. And if that's where you are this morning, I'd encourage you to just take a deep breath in and begin to release that. And as we prepare to go in for a brief moment of silence, I want you to think on this. What does it mean for you to love God, neighbor, and self. Meditate on this for just a moment as we go into the silence. And as we begin to come back into the room, at your own pace, you can take that reflection with you or release it. Know that no matter how you choose to love God or neighbor or self, that it's the right way for you. Love is the answer. Doesn't matter the question. And so it is.